In a country blessed with rainforests, oil, and culture, one man's shadow has stretched for more than 4 decades. His face aged, his voice distant, yet his signature still rules every decree. How can a nation so rich in talent remain trapped in silence? This is the story of how Paul Biya, the world's oldest sitting president, turned Cameroon's democracy into a dynasty, an empire of loyalty, fear, and forgotten dreams. And it's the story of the people still waiting for dawn. The camera drifts over Yaoundé's hills, where government buildings gleam beneath a hazy afternoon sun. Soldiers in crisp uniforms guard wide boulevards named for heroes long gone. From above it looks orderly, stable, almost peaceful. But inside ministries and state companies, the machinery of a very different system hums quietly, one built on patronage, secrecy, and time. Paul Biya has ruled Cameroon since 1982. To many in the younger generation, he's less a man than a constant, an institution that seems older than the republic itself. His portrait hangs in classrooms, police stations, and dusty offices. Yet few citizens under 30 have ever heard him speak live. Power here is exercised not through presence, but through endurance. The story of how Biya consolidated control begins not with tyranny, but with calculation. In the early 1980s, Cameroon was one of Africa's more promising post-colonial states, a bilingual bridge between the English-speaking West and the French-speaking center. A modest oil producer, a country with fertile land and relative peace, while its neighbors struggled with coups. When Amadou Ahidjo, the first president, unexpectedly resigned in 1982, his quiet technocrat prime minister, Paul Biya, seemed a safe choice. Few realized that the calm demeanor concealed extraordinary political instinct. Within 2 years, the alliance between Ahidjo's loyalists and Biya's camp fractured. Accusations of plotting and regional favoritism surfaced. In 1984, an attempted coup shook Yaoundé. The mutiny failed, but its aftermath defined the regime. Thousands were arrested, many executed, and Biya emerged as the unchallenged leader. What had started as a transition became a transformation. Fear entered the political bloodstream. The narrator's tone lowers slightly, analytical yet somber. Biya learned an enduring truth of authoritarian politics. Stability sells. To France, Cameroon's former colonial power, he was reliable, a partner who maintained order, paid debts, and opposed radicalism. Western governments rewarded him with aid and silence. Inside Cameroon, he built a vast patronage network linking civil servants, generals, and business elites. Loyalty was not demanded with slogans. It was purchased through appointments and concessions. The system became self-sustaining. Each beneficiary invested in keeping the old man on the throne. By the 1990s, Africa was changing. The Berlin Wall had fallen and the West began preaching democracy to its allies. Under pressure, Biya announced multi-party elections. It was a calculated risk, the forms of democracy without its risks. Opposition leaders were allowed rallies. Newspapers published criticism, but the state retained control of the Electoral Commission, the media, and the courts. When protests grew, soldiers enforced calm. And so Cameroon entered the age of managed democracy, a script familiar from Moscow to Kinshasa. The documentary camera shifts to Douala's bustling markets, where traders complain of taxes and electricity cuts, but speak cautiously when the subject turns to politics. Everyone knows, one vendor says with a tight smile, but nobody says. Fear has become routine, worn like a second skin. Economically, Biya's rule mirrors the paradox of many resource-rich nations. Oil revenues and foreign loans fuel grand projects, yet public hospitals decay and rural roads crumble. The president's trips to Geneva, his favored destination for medical treatment and retreat, became symbols of detachment. While he governed mostly from abroad, his circle of loyal ministers and security chiefs ensured continuity. The state became an organism whose heartbeat was survival. Internationally, Cameroon's image remained deceptively calm. Compared to coups in the Central African Republic or chaos in Chad, Biya's regime looked steady. Western diplomats praised him as a guarantor of peace. But beneath that calm lay deep fractures, ethnic, linguistic, generational. The narrator pauses. In the Anglophone regions, the Northwest and Southwest, once under British rule, resentment simmered. Teachers and lawyers protested discrimination, demanding equal treatment in courts and schools. The government's heavy-handed response ignited what would later be known as the Anglophone crisis. By the 2010s, militias calling for secession had taken up arms and villages burned. Thousands fled to Nigeria. The state called it terrorism. Locals called it desperation. The conflict exposed a truth long hidden. Cameroon's unity was less a bond of nationhood than an arrangement maintained by fear and fatigue. At this point, the narration weaves between past and present. Biya's longevity has turned politics into heritage. Generations have lived and died under the same administration. In a world of social media revolutions, Cameroon remains frozen in analog power. Opposition figures like Maurice Kamto promise change, but elections remain rituals where outcomes are predicted months in advance. Even when votes suggest discontent, courts conveniently reinterpret results. For many citizens, hope has migrated, not to the ballot box, but to emigration. Experts interviewed on screen discuss the mechanics of longevity. One explains how decentralization laws remain on paper while governors appointed from Yaoundé control provinces. Another points to the fusion of the ruling party, the RDPC, with the state itself, its colors, blue and white, dominating public events. To refuse party membership in certain regions is to risk career extinction. Through such invisible threads, control persists. Still, Biya's genius lies not only in repression, but in adaptation. When donor fatigue grew, he promised reform. When youth unrest rose, he launched employment programs that quietly vanished into bureaucracy. He has mastered the art of governing by postponement, never fully resolving problems, but ensuring none explode beyond control. The film's tone turns reflective. Cameroon's tragedy is not chaos, but inertia. Unlike nations torn by daily violence, it suffers from slow suffocation, the erosion of trust, the migration of its brightest minds, the dull acceptance that nothing will change. In Douala's universities, young graduates study economics while dreaming of Canada. In Yaoundé's ministries, senior officials count years to retirement, not reforms. The country moves, but in circles. As Part 1 closes, the narrator observes how history repeats itself quietly. In 2018, at 85, Biya won yet another election with over 70% of the vote. Celebrations in the capital felt orchestrated. Cameras caught the president waving from a distance, frail but smiling. Outside the lens, whispers spread, who truly governs? Some say it is the First Lady's inner circle. Others point to security chiefs and oligarchs. In a sense, it no longer matters. The regime has outlived the man. It has become a system with its own survival instinct, a machine that continues even as its creator fades. The final lines of this first half linger over the image of a lone flag fluttering above Unity Palace. The narrator's voice softens. For nearly half a century, Paul Biya has ruled not by vision, but by the illusion of eternity. And in that illusion, an entire nation has been held in pause. The night over Yaoundé is still. Streetlights flicker across empty avenues, and the presidential palace stands lit like a monument to another century. Inside its marble halls, decisions are made quietly, signatures replacing speeches, routine masking decay. For decades, Paul Biya's power has rested not on charisma or terror, but on something subtler, fatigue. A nation too tired to fight, too cautious to hope. Cameroon's political system endures through design. It is not chaos that keeps it standing, but precision. Each layer, from the local administrator to the governor, from the minister to the army chief, knows the boundaries of obedience. The president rarely intervenes directly. Instead, he rules by distance, delegating just enough power to keep rivals competing for proximity. In that competition lies his strength. When everyone owes their career to his favor, no one dares imagine his absence. This model, governing by invisibility, has become Biya's signature. He rarely addresses the nation. Cabinet meetings are sporadic. Decisions arrive as decrees signed in cursive. Yet even in silence, his presence defines everything. In Cameroon, policies may shift, governments may reshuffle, But the underlying reality remains constant. The system protects itself first. The narrator's tone steadies, an academic calm layered over quiet indignation. Cameroon's elite have learned to navigate this system like a marketplace. To rise, one must show loyalty rather than vision. Development projects are announced, budgets approved, tenders allocated, then vanish into administrative fog. Roads are built on paper, hospitals refurbished in reports, while rural communities wait years for electricity. This is not accidental corruption, it is structural. The circulation of funds sustains allegiance. International partners, too, play their part. French corporations maintain influence in energy, banking, and construction. Chinese firms secure mining rights and infrastructure contracts. The West, preoccupied with migration and terrorism in the Sahel, values Biya's predictability. Cameroon offers stability, an illusion that reassures donors. And so, billions in aid and loans flow through the same channels year after year, rarely challenging the architecture of stagnation. Yet, beneath the surface, fatigue hardens into quiet resentment. In Bamenda, Biya, and Kumba, the Anglophone crisis drags on. Entire towns bear the scars of burned schools and abandoned villages. Both sides, the military and separatist militias, commit abuses, and civilians pay the price. The government calls for national dialogue, but the dialogue ends before it begins. Each roundtable feels scripted, every promise recycled. The conflict persists because its resolution would demand accountability, a word the regime has long forgotten. The narrator shifts focus toward the human cost. In rural hospitals, mothers give birth under candlelight as power cuts interrupt generators. Teachers wait months for salaries. Young engineers drive motorcycle taxis to survive. The tragedy of Cameroon is not just dictatorship. It is waste, the waste of talent, time, and potential. A generation born after 1990 has never known another president. For them, politics is an inheritance, not a choice. And yet, in the cafes of Douala and the student hostels of Yaoundé, conversations still spark with defiance. They speak of reform, of digital activism, of changing minds before systems. But every effort meets the same obstacle, the architecture of fear. Surveillance extends beyond police checkpoints. Phone calls are monitored, activists detained, journalists sued for defamation. The message is consistent: criticize if you must, but never organize. Biya's genius has been to transform repression into routine. Arrests are rare but symbolic, enough to remind citizens of boundaries. Courts move slowly, files disappear. The state's greatest weapon is time. Opposition figures like Maurice Kamto, who challenged the 2018 election results, learned this well. Detained for months, then released without trial, Kamto returned to a political landscape frozen in place. Every challenge dissolves in procedural fog. The narrator's voice grows reflective, tinged with sorrow. For decades, the world has underestimated the cost of silence. Cameroon's crisis is not visible like war, but it erodes life from within. When institutions serve survival instead of progress, corruption becomes culture and apathy becomes protection. People stop believing in change because belief itself becomes dangerous. Inside the ruling elite, succession has become a forbidden subject. Paul Biya, now in his 90s, appears only occasionally in public. His frailty is evident, yet the system continues as though time itself were suspended. Some whisper about his son, Frank Biya, a businessman quietly promoted through public appearances and symbolic roles. Others mention powerful ministers and generals preparing their own contingencies, but the truth remains elusive. No one knows who truly governs or who will. This uncertainty is deliberate. By refusing to name a successor, Biya ensures that every ambitious figure remains dependent, hesitant to act. The possibility of power becomes the leash that restrains them. Even the military, Cameroon's ultimate guarantor of order, is divided along regional and generational lines, with promotions carefully balanced to prevent unity. The result is paradoxical: a strong regime built on collective weakness. The film transitions to aerial footage of Yaoundé at dawn, golden light over red rooftops, the city waking to another day. The narrator continues, economists describe Cameroon as Africa in miniature, a country of every landscape, from desert to forest, mountain to sea. Its natural wealth is extraordinary: oil, timber, cocoa, gold. Yet more than 40% of its people live below the poverty line. The question is not what Cameroon lacks, but why abundance never translates into prosperity. The answer lies in governance, not geography. Oil revenues, managed through opaque structures, rarely enter the public budget. State-owned enterprises serve as cash reserves for the powerful. The National Hydrocarbons Company, long shielded from scrutiny, operates like a private bank for elites. The result is a parallel economy, one for survival, one for privilege. For ordinary citizens, daily life depends on improvisation. Taxi drivers pay informal tolls to police. Street vendors bribe municipal agents for space. Bureaucracy itself has become a currency. Each document, each permit, carries a hidden fee. What might seem dysfunction from the outside is, in reality, a system of extraction that sustains loyalty from the bottom up. The narrator pauses, allowing the weight of the truth to settle. And yet, history teaches that no structure endures forever. Every long rule carries within it the seeds of its undoing. In Biya's Cameroon, those seeds are demographic. 2/3 of the population is under 30. They grew up connected to the world through smartphones and social media, exposed to global expectations and comparisons. They see how Ghana, Rwanda, and Senegal experiment with renewal while their own nation ages in silence. For this generation, fear is thinning. Online, anonymous voices mock the government's rituals, remix speeches into memes, expose scandals once confined to whispers. The state responds with censorship and arrests, but the digital tide is relentless. The battle for Cameroon's future will not be fought in parliament, but in connectivity, in whether truth can circulate faster than intimidation. As the documentary unfolds, the camera turns to Cameroon's diaspora, students, professionals, and refugees scattered across Europe and America. From Paris to Montreal, they remain tethered to home through remittances and memory. Many left to escape stagnation, yet find themselves unable to forget. Some organize protests, fund civil society initiatives, or document abuses. Others feel caught between hope and resignation. "We love our country," one expatriate says, "but our country no longer knows us." Back in Yaoundé, the old routines persist. National Day parades march on. State media broadcast praise songs. Ministers deliver speeches about progress. But beneath the choreography, exhaustion deepens. Even the loyalists sense the inevitable. The twilight of Biya's era is approaching. What remains uncertain is what follows: a managed transition, a power struggle, or chaos. The narrator's tone tightens. When regimes last too long, they often collapse not from rebellion but from rot. Decision-making slows, corruption multiplies, and the machinery of governance jams under its own weight. The question facing Cameroon is whether it can reinvent itself before collapse becomes crisis. Civil society, though constrained, remains a flicker of resistance. Journalists like Mimi Mefo and activists in Yaoundé's legal community risk arrest to expose injustices. Church leaders call for reconciliation between Anglophone and Francophone communities. Economists propose federal reforms to share power and revenue more fairly. But these efforts require political will, and that remains in short supply. The film's mood grows more intimate, as if addressing the viewer directly. To understand how Paul Biya stole Cameroon is to understand that theft here does not mean a single act. It is the gradual confiscation of a nation's future, not through violence alone, but through delay, through the quiet replacement of ambition with obedience, of participation with fatigue. Over 40 years, Biya's regime has stolen time itself, decades that might have been spent building institutions, nurturing innovation, healing divisions. And yet, the narrator concedes, history rarely moves in straight lines. Even in long darkness, moments of clarity appear. The rise of civic media, the persistence of teachers who continue classes despite unpaid wages, the small entrepreneurs who refuse to leave, all are quiet acts of resistance. There is also irony in Biya's endurance. His longevity, once his strength, now exposes the system's fragility. Without him, the network of personal loyalties risks unraveling. Ministers, generals, and business elites, bound only by access to the presidency, may turn against one another when that access ends. The very architecture that kept Cameroon stable could, in his absence, become the source of its greatest instability. The narrator's tone softens again, contemplative. For the ordinary Cameroonian, the question is no longer whether Biya will fall, but what will rise afterward. Change, when it comes, may be chaotic. Transitions after long autocracies often are, but they are also moments of rebirth. Across Africa, the cycle of old men clinging to power is slowly breaking. The continent's new generation demands accountability, not paternalism. Cameroon's youth have the same potential. Their challenge will be to rebuild faith in governance, to reimagine citizenship not as submission, but participation, to turn anger into institution and pain into policy. The road will be long, but no nation can remain paused forever. The film's final sequence fades from cityscapes to the countryside, the Sanaga River winding through dense forest. Children walking to school beneath palms, a miner digging by hand in the red earth. The narrator speaks with quiet resolve. The story of Paul Biya is not only the story of a man, but of a system, a mirror reflecting how power can outlive purpose. For 40 years he has ruled by postponement, mastering the art of survival. But time, unlike politics, cannot be postponed forever. In the end, no ruler truly owns a nation. They borrow it from those who came before and those yet to be born. And when the borrowing ends, history demands its due. Cameroon waits for that reckoning, not with shouts, but with patience worn thin, hearts ready for renewal. Somewhere in its villages and cities, among its teachers, nurses, and dreamers, the next chapter is already being written, and when that chapter begins, the silence will finally break.